Hi there, this is Andy C from Pieces of 8-Bit. In this episode, we are going to have a look at setting up a VirtualBox environment for us to play some of our retro games. So you may have seen my Need for Speed 2 review where I was running VirtualBox with Windows 98. The reason I did that, for two reasons actually. For me, one is that I have a Mac, which I do my video recording on, which means that obviously I can't run Windows without using Boot Camp. I don't particularly fancy running Windows 98 in a Boot Camp partition. It just feels like overkill. But the main reason is that for most people, even Windows users, they will find that running some older games that were designed for Windows 98, Windows 95, Windows ME, those kind of older late 90s Windows operating systems, they just won't run in modern Windows. There are better backward compatibility tools in more recent versions of Windows, but I think having VirtualBox set up is a nice way to sort of separate things out. It also means that you can install multiple versions of Windows into small partitions to allow you to run some of these games. So what I'm going to try and do is keep it as technically light as possible so that anyone can come along, have a look at these instructions and hopefully get them started on running an old version of Windows. It may be that you decide not to run any games and you just fancy a trip down memory lane and have a look at Windows 95 or Windows 98. I don't know why you'd want to do that, to be perfectly honest, but each to their own. So let's dive in and have a look at the setup for VirtualBox. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need to do is actually go and get yourself Oracle VirtualBox. It's a free download from Oracle. It's been around for years. Obviously, Oracle are a big software company, so you can trust in the validity of the software and where it's coming from. I will pop the link in the descriptions for you. You can just go to Oracle's page, so virtualbox.org, and you will see the instructions here and the downloads for it. For me, I'm going to be downloading the Mac OS / Intel host version. For those of you running Windows, obviously the Windows one, Linux, and so on. Obviously, as you've already seen, I've already downloaded and installed this. So you get a small installer, which you just run through the wizard, and that will get you up and running. Okay, so once we've got VirtualBox opened, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new instance. So this is the one that I used earlier for doing my Need for Speed demo. So we're just going to create a new one here. So if we go to new, we're going to give it a name. So we're going to call this Windows 98. Select a folder to put it in. We don't have an ISO image at the moment, so that will be created. Already here, we've got the version of Windows. So if you've got Windows 95, obviously you could select something different. Versions of Windows all the way up to the most recent, right back to Windows 3.1. Okay, so let's click through that. Base memory, so have a good think about what a machine of the era that you're sort of trying to emulate would have. So for me, I went for 64 meg. So obviously in a modern computer where you've got several gigabytes of RAM, 64 megabytes is really not going to give you too much of a headache. In terms of setting the CPUs, I had a bit of a struggle with this one. When I set one CPU, basically I've got 12 cores in my current machine, so when I set one CPU, the machine ran quite slowly. When I set two, it actually ran a bit too quick, and you probably didn't hear it in my Need for Speed video, but I did have a few little sort of audio skips. To be honest with you, I think that is a better outcome than having it run slowly and be virtually unplayable. Okay, in terms of disk size, again, think about the sort of size of disk that you would have had at the time. Obviously, for late 90s machines, 2 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes was pretty standard as a hard drive size. Again, with multi-terabyte drives that people have nowadays, 2 gigabytes for a disk image is really not going to be too much of a problem for you. If you've already got one set up, you can go and use an existing one, but obviously we're going to do this from scratch, so we're going to create a brand new disk image at this point. Okay, so we're ready to go now. That's the basic setting for our Windows 98 machine. So essentially, once we've done this, what we've got here is a Windows 98 machine that's ready to accept a new OS. it's essentially like a PC within a PC. Okay, so the next step now is to get Windows 98 installed on our virtual PC. So we're going to just click and go through to start. So we've got the correct one selected. Click through to start. There's a few things we're going to notice here. We've got this auto capture keyboard come up. I'll talk to you about that in a second. First thing it's saying is that it can't boot anything. So there's nothing on that hard drive, that virtual hard drive that we created. So we need to go and find a Windows disk to install. Now, if you have your Windows 98 disks lying around somewhere, you can pop those in and you can burn those to an ISO, what's called an ISO image. Essentially, in the Mac, on Mac, you can do that in Disk Utility. There's an option to create a disk image from a CD or a DVD. In Windows, you can use something like WinCD EMU. So that's a free piece of software that you can go to the web and find. I'll pop the link in for you in a moment. So here's one that I made earlier. So this is our Windows 98 second edition ISO that I created. So let's mount and retry reboot. I mentioned about the auto capture keyboard. That may not appear. So if that doesn't appear, you can go up to the top here and there are options to get your mouse integration and keyboard integration working. Otherwise you might find that nothing happens. So we're going to boot this from CD-ROM. You'll notice that the screen is very small. So what I'm going to do is just resize that. So there's an option with the window on Mac, it's Command S. Click on display and then we can just scale that up. Because we're on a very, very high resolution computer compared to sort of 1990 standards, that's why it appears so tiny on the screen. So let's just maximize the size of that a little bit. So the first thing we want to do then is start Windows 98 setup from CD-ROM. So you should have keyboard access here. There we go. That should now be proceeding. For those of you that remember Windows 98, this will all seem remarkably familiar very, very soon. There's a few little reboots that happen as we go through this. Just click off that for a second. So our hard drive that we created earlier isn't formatted yet, so we just go configure unallocated disk space. We don't need large disk support. Oh no, we do need large disk support. Actually, we're over 512 megs, so it's funny to think that anything over half a gigabyte is considered large disk support. So we are going to do a reboot. Remember, we're always booting from CD. Yeah, let's do that again. There's nothing currently on our hard drive at the moment, so that's what we need to do through this. Okay, so our format is now complete. And we're just going to do a quick scan. And now we're into the Windows 98 setup. Do you see the mouse integration piece is now clicked on, which means that our mouse is now working inside. You'll notice it's trapped inside this little window here. On Mac, there's a quick key. If you press the command key, that will allow you to turn control to your system mouse. You'll see down in the bottom here where it says left and then the little command symbol. Windows will have something very similar, so just press the button that corresponds and that will let your mouse escape from that window. So now we're just going to run through the setup as though this was a brand new PC. Windows 98 setup is pretty straightforward. There's not much to it. Takes a little bit of time, so we'll obviously skip over some of these bits. We're just going to accept all of the standard settings here, nothing too clever. We just want a base setup of Windows 98. So just checking we've got enough space available. We're going to run a typical install. If you want to go and set some other bits and pieces up, feel free to do so, but the typical install is more than suitable for playing all the games that you would like. We're going to install all the most common components and we're going to give it a name. Okay. So I'm in the UK, so I'm going to pick the UK and off we go. So let's leave that. I'll come back when this is done. Okay, so the Windows installation has finished now. So this time round we're going to boot from the hard disk. So let's just do that. Oh, Windows 98, there you go. So what it's going to do now is it's just going to run through the last little bits of setup and then we should be ready to go. So let's give a name to the user. Accept agreement. And I am now going to go and pop the key in. So with the key, you should have the key on the back of your CD box. If you haven't got the CD anymore, you can go find the image online and then just use the same CD key that's on your box. Okay, so I've entered my key now, and basically we're ready to just do the final setup. So again, I'm just going to leave this now. It's a lot less than 15 minutes. We've got a couple of very modern CPUs that are doing this, so shouldn't take very long at all. I'll be right back with you. Okay, so that last little bit of setup is now complete, and again we're going to come in here and we are going to boot from hard disk. Let me just make sure I've got the focus on there. Okay, so there it is, Windows 98. I think we're going to go through a few final little setup bits. For those of you who remember these old setup pieces, there was so much user interaction that needed to happen, so you couldn't just leave it for a couple of hours like you can with modern systems. Well, say a couple of hours, you know, like 20 minutes, half hour, whatever it takes. You'd have to be around to interact with the installer. So now what basically is happening is it's going to be looking for all of the hardware. It's going to ask us for our time zone, so let's go ahead and do that. Nice and easy. Where are we? Greenwich Mean Time, there we go. Okay. All right. And yes, it'll go look for hardware, graphics cards, sound cards, that kind of thing. VirtualBox will provide sort of some out of the box, some hardware for Windows to use. So that's what it's going to do. So again, I'm going to leave this running for the next few minutes, and again I will be right back with you. Okay, so there's a few little extra bits of setting that we need to complete to enable us to get things up and running properly. Most of your settings within Windows 98 will be fine. So your sound cards and everything else will all be set up. It sets up as a Sound Blaster 16. In fact, if you click on your VirtualBox Manager here, you can see our Windows 98 that's running, and you can see all the settings. So I'll just quickly run through these with you. You can see our base memory and number of processors that we set at the beginning there. Our video memory, which we may or may not want to increase. So 32 megabytes is probably pretty good for late 90s, but we might want to up that to 64. You won't be able to do that until you've actually stopped your instance running, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. You can see here our storage devices. So Windows 98.vdi, that's the virtual hard drive that we created at the very beginning of the setup. Nothing in our floppy drive at the moment, and we're currently mounted onto the optical drive, which is Windows 98 2nd edition .iso. We've got some other ones in here that we could mount. You can see the Need for Speed 2 ISO that I created before. So when we want to play Need for Speed 2, what we'll need to do is mount that from here. You can also do it from when you're actually on the window here at the top. You can mount the drives here as well. While we're in this menu, in fact, also what you can do here, I've got a PlayStation USB remote, game controller plugged in at the moment. So you can click on that and that will mount that USB device. If we do that at the moment, now last time I did this, it actually crashed VMware and then it worked the second time round. So let's click through this, search for the best driver. Let's go to the CD-ROM drive. There we go, it's found it. Okay, that's great. So that's our game controller installed. Let's just finish the setup of that. Sometimes it'll ask you to restart, sometimes it won't. For those of you who remember Windows 98, that's pretty standard. It was pretty hit and miss as to whether you would need to restart or not. So let's go and have a look at the graphics card setup then. So ultimately, as I mentioned before, you need a specific driver. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is to close down our instance of Windows. So shut that down. That'll enable us to play with a few more settings there. So first thing we want to do is swap this to VMS SVGA. So if we look at our previous setup, here, you see it's set to VMS VGA. So that's the same thing that we want there. This will need a specific driver. That driver can be found on this address here, which I will send to you. It's vbemp.drv is what we're looking for. I've already downloaded this, and again what we're going to do is we're going to need to create that as a disk image to allow us to, it's essentially the same as putting a floppy disk in. So I've already created one. It's the same process as when you created your ISO image for Windows before. So you need to go and do the same thing, point it at the directory with the drivers in, and that will create a drive that you can essentially plug into your Windows setup. So let me just kick the start of this off once more. I am going to mount that. So here it is. This is the drive that I created before in a floppy disk. You can see in here you can create and add images here as well if you want to. So you can create a disk image and add things to it. So we're going to choose that. Let's just close these off here. Back into Windows again. You can see it's picked up the change. It spotted that we changed the hardware underneath, or the virtualized hardware. So I'm going to click through it again here. So we're going to click on floppy disk this time because we have one inserted. There we go. And we found it. And we click through the wizard and we're going to restart. So we're almost there. Right, okay, this is something to bear in mind. If you leave the floppy disk mounted, for those of you who are familiar with PCs from the 90s, if you had a floppy disk inserted in the drive, it would try and boot off the A drive. Of course, it's not a bootable disk, so we are confusing things here. So let's just cancel this for a second. Let's go into floppy disks. Let's remove that from the virtual drive. Let's kill the machine, and let's start it again. Here we go. Right, we've also still got the CD drive mounted. We don't want to start from that. So I'm going to click on hard disk. Obviously, good idea if you're not going to be using the CD anymore, just to remove that. So let's get that started. We're going to get that horrendous noise again, I think, of like a chiming bell, unless I told it not to come back. No, I didn't. Now I've got to wait for it to redraw itself again. Please don't show this screen every time Windows 98 starts. Okay, I did discover that I had done this slightly wrong. So when I mounted and created the disk, it didn't quite work properly. So this is probably a good opportunity for me to show you how to create a disk that you can use to put your drivers on and transfer to Windows 98. So if we click on to the devices up here, go to our optical and go to choose create a disk image. What we can then do is go to create, and we can load up our file system here, essentially dropping the files that we want into the drive that we want. Click on create, and that should create a drive for us to use. I suspect because I've already got one created, that's not worked, but ultimately this is the drive that I created through using that process just a moment ago. It automatically renames itself to the name of your instance.viso. So we've got that mounted already, and if we go back into Windows, you'll see it appear on the disk drive here as Windows 98. If we double click into that, we will see the files that we put in there. So those are the driver files. So when we went in earlier, if I go to settings, go to advanced, go to adapter, you can see that it's still set up a standard PCI graphics adapter, which is not correct. So we're going to click change, run through the wizard here. So we're going to display a list of the drivers in a specific location and have disk. We're going to select our CD drive. There we go. You can see it there. Click on that and go to the 032 meg. That's the number of that's the size of the graphics card memory that we selected when we set Windows up. Click OK. Click OK. And there we go. VBE mini port standard PCI graphics adapter VGA. That is the one that we want. So let's run through the setup for that. It's finished. Apply, and we should now be able to change the size. It will probably ask us to reset when we do. We're going to keep it at 640 by 480. A lot of games from this time were 640 by 480. What you can do, as I mentioned before, is you can do a zoom. So if you bring up the quick menu, in the case of the Mac, it's Command S. You can go to display, and we're already at 300% actually. Obviously, this is a very, very high resolution screen, which is why we're seeing it this way. You can obviously make the screen a lot bigger if you wish to. That will probably make it disappear off the screen if we do that. So let's go for 800 by 600 and apply that. We want to do a restart, so let's go ahead and do that. So while we're just waiting for that to go, ultimately there should be nothing more left for you to do now other than to go and find your old Windows games and start getting them installed. This super loud intro sequence, you can see already that the screen is a bit bigger. If we go back into properties now, we should see, there we go, 256 colours. So that's all good to go now. There's no 3D acceleration on this, but that shouldn't be a problem for most of the games that were around at that time. If you want to install a game, essentially what you're going to do is same as what we did before. We're going to go up to here, up to devices, and we're going to go and find our game ISO that we've created previously. I have a DVD drive on here as well, so if you've got a DVD inserted in there, you can actually just connect it directly to the hardware itself. I prefer to create the image, it tends to be a bit quicker, just to get that done and just rattle through the installation. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't just insert a any kind of game disc or your Windows disc or whatever into that drive and install from there. Well, that's it. Hopefully that was really useful. Hopefully not too complicated, and the steps are easy enough to follow. Go get yourself set up with Windows and have a look at some of those old games on Windows 95, 98, ME, or whatever you want to do. You don't have to use VirtualBox. You can also use DOSBox, which is just a standard DOS emulator. We'll play a lot of the old DOS-based games prior to 1995. You can also use DOSBox X, which will also allow you, like VirtualBox, to install a full-blown version of Windows, although I did find that didn't work as well for me. So hopefully that will get you what you need. If you don't need to use VirtualBox to get those games running, then so much the better. Obviously this is particularly useful for people on Mac or Linux who want to just run a virtual machine without having to reboot into something like Boot Camp. I will be doing some more of these tech kind of how-to guides to get you into the world of retro gaming. So we'll be looking at some emulators, also be looking at some of the mini consoles and some of the tech there. Especially around the Amiga, which allows you to do sideload some old games. And we'll also be looking at the Raspberry Pi and how you can get a RetroPie build on there, which also allows you to play a lot of these older games, including PC games actually. So keep tuned for those. I'll be doing some more retro reviews soon, and I'll also be looking at the LEGO reviews in the not too distant future. So until then, have a great day. Thanks ever so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.